Hi, this is K.M. Weiland, and you are listening to the 323rd episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. Time always blows by so quickly, and this year seemed to blast past at record speed. For me, 2016 was mostly a year of keeping my head down and working on my fiction. But some of the highlights in 2016 for me included the launch of the Story Structure database on my website, the German translation of Outlining Your Novel. It joins its Japanese and Korean brothers, which is pretty cool. I presented a day-long workshop to the Romance Writers of America chapter in gorgeous Tucson, Arizona at the end of June. A second 101 Best Websites for Writers mention from Writer's Digest. A fourth Write to Den Top Blogs for Writers award. The release of Storming, my fourth novel. An audiobook release for Conquering Writer's Block and Summoning Inspiration. A special edition webinar called 3 Missing Pieces of Stunning Story Structure that I did for Writer's Digest, which you can access as a free bonus when you pick up the paperback version of Novel and Short Story Writer's Market 2016. And finally, I completed the first draft of my historical superhero work in progress, Wayfarer. Next year I plan to edit Wayfarer and start outlining the sequel to my Portal Fantasy Dreamlander. Yay! I also hope to finally do what so many of you have been asking me to do, put together a book, or maybe books, on character arcs, and another on common writing mistakes. I also still have it in the works to put together a number of courses on outlining and structuring, and of course offer more webinars. 2016 is shaping up to be another fast, furious, and fun year, and I hope the same for you. And now I hope you enjoy this week's podcast entitled How to Study Plot and Character in Your Favorite Stories, 5 Easy Steps. What if I told you the best way to learn how to create amazing plots and characters in your own stories was by purposeful osmosis? First, of course, I might have to explain that purposeful osmosis means reading lots and lots of books and watching lots and lots of movies and consciously studying what it is about them that works. With that explanation out of the way, chances are you're in agreement. But chances are you're also not entirely sure how to actually make this happen. Just how do you figure out how to study plot and character in other people's stories? Not too long ago, a word player emailed me asking, what is your process for studying the plot, structure, character arcs, etc. of the books you read and the movies you watch? I've been wondering for a while how one goes about studying the writer's work as they read and watch. This is an excellent question. After all, it is easy for Stephen King to say, if you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all others. Read a lot and write a lot. There's no way around these 2 things that I'm aware of, no shortcut. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a tremendous piece of advice, but it's also pretty vague. That's it, we just read, and the answer is, well, what? Come to us? Yes, actually, to some extent, anyway. The more we read and watch good and bad stories, the better our own storytelling instincts will get without our having to do even one thing more. But in the interest of upping our game here, how about we do a few things more? Today I'm going to give you an actionable plan for how to study plot and character and lots more in your favorite stories. Number 1, start with an action plan. The first step in being purposeful is, of course, to have a purpose. Often you may simply want to observe the books you read and the movies you watch, generally letting the story's own strengths and weaknesses guide your study. But it can help you dig down deeper if you have a list of things you want to consciously pay attention to. I recommend a short list. The shorter the better, in fact. Why? Because your brain can only keep track of so many tangents at once, says the woman with 20 tabs open in her browser right now. But you'll get better results if you focus on 1 or 2 primary elements or techniques at a time. For example, lately I've been concentrating on dialogue, both because it's something I'm working on myself and because I'm planning a series of blog posts on dialogue for some time next year. I watch the ebb and flow of dialogue, taking note of what works and what doesn't, what's the effect, and why did the author intend it. This isn't to say, of course, that you can't also take note of anything interesting in any category that reveals itself, but only consciously follow certain rabbits down their holes. Number 2, arm yourself with highlighters and pins. This is for serious studiers only. Seriously, I only do this one when I'm in full battle mode. For example, like when I was dissecting Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre so I could write about its brilliant techniques in Jane Eyre, the Writer's Digest annotated classic. This is where you're going to want to divide your studying into a few more categories, one for each color of highlighter. Go through the book, highlighting appropriately whenever you find an interesting passage. Write notes with abandon in the margins. Then, when you've finished, go through again and type up your notes, expanding on them to fully record your reactions and new knowledge. I say this is only for serious studiers, primarily because this is a fast track to interfering with reading as pure pleasure, and also to making a mess of your paperbacks. This is rigorous studying at its best and will require your full brain power. No reading to get to sleep when you're doing this. Number 3, break down the structure. The surest way to get a grasp on plot and story structure is by consciously breaking down the structure in books and movies, as I regularly do for the story structure database on my website. So how do I do this? Start with an easy shortcut. Divide the total page count of a book or the total running time of a movie by 8. Why? Because the major structural moments happen at each eighth of the story. Number 1, the inciting event happens at the 12% mark. Number 2, the first plot point / the end of the first act happens at the 25% mark. 3, the first pinch point happens at the 37% mark. 4, the midpoint, halfway through the second act, happens at the 50% mark. 5, the second pinch point happens at the 62% mark. 6, the third plot point / the beginning of the third act happens at the 75% mark. And 7, the climax happens at the 88% mark. For movies, I use my handy dry erase board notebook to note the approximate minute of each turning point so I can easily watch the runtime and take note of what's happening. For books, I use little book darts bookmarks to mark the appropriate page at each turning point. This way I'm not totally adrift within the story. I can watch the clock or the page count and know to be on the watch for the respective structural moment roundabout there. This is a fabulous way to grasp story structure as a whole, and just as importantly, to understand how the various structural elements can manifest in vastly different ways from story to story. So you can study my and others' many examples in the story structure database on my site. If you look in the very top toolbar, you'll find the database. And if you try this yourself, please share with us. The story structure database is interactive and always open for submissions. Number 4, examine your reactions. Whenever you finish a story, give yourself a moment before rushing off to the next thing. Just sit there and think about your reactions to what you just experienced. Ask yourself, how did the story make you feel? What did you like about it? What did you dislike? Do you think it was an objectively good story? Did you dislike it anyway? And why? Do you think it was an objectively problematic or even bad story? And did you like it anyway? If so, why? Within the answers to these questions lies your greatest opportunity for growth as a writer. If you can distill your often nebulous feelings about a story down into logical facts about what made you feel that way, you will then be able to add other authors' effective weapons to your own arsenal. I use this technique after every story I read or watch. It's where I get the ideas for fully half the posts on my website. Number 5, transcribe the prose. This trick is especially useful if you're trying to crack the code of not just great storytelling, but great writing. What is it about some authors' prose that makes it sing so effortlessly and powerfully? The whole point of great prose is that it's flawless. We're not supposed to think about it. We're not supposed to see the cracks where the pieces are joined together. If we saw the cracks, that would defeat the whole purpose. As a result, simply reading great prose isn't always the most effective way to learn how to write awesome prose of your own. What you need to do is sit down with a notebook and pen and a favorite book and start transcribing passages. I recommend doing this longhand with an actual pen, since this will slow you down and force you to think about and absorb each word and punctuation choice. I used to do this every day, and it never failed to amaze me how it allowed me to suddenly see the building blocks the authors had used in crafting their prose. Their seemingly inimitable mastery of wordcraft was suddenly within my grasp. It was something I could learn, and that you can too. Although you can learn from other authors, such as me, who break down stories and share what they're learning in blogs and books, you will get more out of the experience by also doing it yourself. So start approaching your book reading and movie watching purposefully, with an intent to logically identify and utilize the tools handed to you by authors you love. But what if it ruins your reading and watching? It's true. It might. Some authors use these practices and find themselves growing hypercritical. But frankly, it shouldn't. The more I learn to identify how other authors are using the craft, the more I appreciate their stories. So give it a try. You'll transform both your appreciation of stories in general and your own writing. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.